Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Twilight Epiphanies Talk Radio with Cindy Magnuson, and the show is about to begin. So, slow down, take a seat, put your feet up, and maybe take some notes, because this show is about you, it's for you, and it is designed to help you receive exactly what you need to be a happier and healthier you. Hello and good evening, everyone. This is Cindy Magnuson. For those of you who are not familiar with me, I am the owner of C Source Energy Epiphanies and founder of the C Technique EFT Plus. And my work can be found at thectechnique.com, and that is SEE. And tonight's show, what I'm doing in a little bit more of casual conversation tonight, a little more off the cuff and not as structured as I usually do, is I'm going to be introducing a series of shows that I'm going to run over the next 2 months. What I've been observing in watching posts and how I usually operate is my function here in society is to help unite causes, in a sense, to help unite our inner direction for the commonality that is amongst all the diversity that's happening. And currently, as more and more of what is coming to the surface in the way of the pedophile rings, human trafficking, transhumanism agenda, sexualization of our children, the political scandals, the sexual misconducts, and on and on and on and on. We first of all need to look at what's taking place on one level as a collective shadow aspect that is surfacing at this time. And what we are in need of doing is understanding how all of us are here right now in this time frame, because we have agreed to be here in this very specific time of experiencing these revelations where that which has been repressed, suppressed, hidden, concealed, and happening virtually right under our noses is now going to be dealt with. And what I want to work within as a foundation over the next 8 weeks is how can we come to a little bit higher understandings in spirituality in order to bring our discernment levels up to a degree of how we are addressing these with our spiritual input, our focus, and our attention in the most optimal ways of helping them without creating any further negative karma for ourselves. And there are specific ways to do that. What I generally see, and many of you, who are working in the fields can observe across the board that everyone has a different, knee-jerk and emotional response per their, perspective of what's happening when these scandals come out. And if we can come together a little bit more, and for one thing, first of all, understand that we have the capacity within us to dismantle and dissolve these creations that have been taking place on a much more easier level than how we might try to approach it in some of the actions that we get pulled into, because our our spiritual directiveness in looking at what is being exposed is very often pulled into causes that are being directed by the people who perpetrated these evils that have been behind the scenes. And if we step back, a little wider space, step up and take a higher perspective, we can come to the view that this general operation that has been behind the scenes has known about this time frame very long now and has a plan in effect for how to steer the collective away from dismantling and healing these spaces in good resolve. And they've been working to place that for a long time as suggestions. So, for instance, there are a lot of political distractions that get put into the mainstream media places so that our collective emotional space is pulled in one direction while a sleight of hand is taking place in some other political arena space. So, on all levels of self, the highest functions that we can do and be participating in are that we begin and continue, as many of us are here already, to educate ourselves about how these creations, these abominations of acts, were incepted, which means thought of, how they were concepted, brought into reality, and now that they are being revealed, because that's the only way that we can truly heal. How do we both work with our own individual trauma wounding and our collective wounding? Because on a collective level, these wounds that we are seeing that are coming up to the surface, being perpetrated and attempted to be continued, are wounds that lie deep in our psyche and in our ancestral spaces also. And, when I talk about the word responsibility, that we will take responsibility for this, sometimes our first feelings about that word is that, well, I didn't create that, and I'm not doing that, and there's no way I'm making that or have been assisting that along to happen. And again, it's a step back space and look at the big picture, because to the degree that we have tuned out of our higher spiritual discernment and awareness of spirit within ourselves, that is where, since tuning out, we have not seen this taking place. So visually, conceptually, we have not even energetically, for many people out there, could not conceive that this was taking place. Other people, however, say like myself, who has experienced a molesting experience, and especially something that's from a high-level political figure, who was able to get by with continuing with their perpetrations because of the fact that they had sold the society around them, the community around them, and only looking at them from what they wanted them to see. And that is what our responsibility is. Our responsibility, again, is to see, S-E-E. Hence, that is part of my work here in what See Source Energy Epiphanies is, as that we tune back in to the understanding of spirit and further develop the ability to see other spectrums of reality that are actually taking place outside our physical energies outside our physical senses that we can see and feel, and go into our intuitive senses of perception in order to address this that's been there, because it is something that is intuitively, energetically, and spiritually very palpable to people who have their higher senses already opened up. So, for example, I am less able to be mind controlled in many cases because of the simple fact even that as a child, because I was imprinted from a sexual predator, the energy of the sexual predator was being read by my senses. So even though I don't remember that imprinting, I have a sense of seeing these energies in people where others do not automatically tune into that because of the fact that I was imprinted in an experience energetically that way. And I was aware of what that energy is behind the scenes. Anyone out there who has had experience around someone who has a sociopath or psychopathic type personality, character, is aware that there are two different characters within one person, one behind the scenes and one out in front of the public. And that personality that is presented to the public is spotless, is perfection for literally mimicking true human emotions while not having the same sense of consciousness and empathy that humans do. And so we can see these vehicles which look and appear to be human, but what is inside is very different than what a human that has their full spiritual senses is inside. And that is, again, what our responsibility is, because once more of us open up these senses, it will not be a space that can delude us anymore as a collective. So in that sense, the more that we can see, the more that we will recognize. And what seeing takes first of all is when these atrocities and horrendous scandals come to the surface, we need to understand how can we integrate them in our own healing space, meaning how can we observe them without it devastating us? Because that is something that very seriously needs to be worked on. It is immensely difficult, especially for anyone who has had abuse experiences and or very deep ancestral abuses within their bloodline, to go into some of these spaces and observe them, because the resonance of energies tunes them in some situations back into the actual experience. And it can be highly traumatizing. So to make it is easier for some of us to believe these events are taking place than it is for other people, because they haven't had these firsthand personal experiences. And it's something that, I'm calling out to people who haven't had the experience, that you have the opportunity to keep yourself from having to experience this if you can learn through these understandings. You're not going to open yourself up inadvertently at some point to some type of experience, or somewhere in your line of children as they go on into the world, you can help them if you can also have awareness of it already and a stance within you of discernment about how you're addressing it. And so I'd like to talk about, personal experience. And for me, coming into this incarnation, don't mean I'm going back to my own personal experience there, but because I came in with this type of a vibration around these energies, I had gone to a job interview at one time, and there was a man across the room, and he happened to be a teacher in this facility. And he kept turning and looking at me as I was talking to the person who I was just casually going through the end of an interview with. And then as I was leaving, he came right over and continued to talk in a different type of energy that I've come to recognize as this is meaningful. There is something important here. And I ended up telling him that I do massage and Reiki energy work, so we exchanged information, and he ended up coming to me over a year's time for Reiki and massage energy work. In the course of time, as I got to know him, I was aware that he was trying to tell me something. So one of the first things he does is, I have this book for you to read, and it's a book about the Bosnian peacekeepers, and it was apparently written by the CIA, and it is about how the Bosnian peacekeepers are running the human trafficking and pedophile level human trafficking through their organizations there, and how a whistleblower opened that up. And when I read that book, I literally almost went catatonic for about 2 hours after that in reading it. I just shuddered because there was something so familiar about what was taking place there. And those of you who aren't familiar with this, it is that the peacekeepers, supposed peacekeepers, are actually stealing children, and 13 to 14-year-old children are being held hostage in the apartments of the men who are working, and they are their sex slaves. And the descriptions within there are absolutely horrendous. And so as he continued to talk more, came to finally telling me that he is a CIA agent, somewhat of a rogue CIA agent, who is here rescuing women from human trafficking. And he proceeded to tell me about how many spaces within a 3-mile radius, 5-mile radius of my home location here have operations, especially that he worked with, which were South Korean women who were brought here under other conditions, thinking they were going to do nanny work or waitressing type work in restaurants, for example, and how they were being placed in these human trafficking massage rings, how they cost $50,000 a piece, and their identification was immediately taken from them, and they were immediately put to work in absolute torture beyond our imagination. And so to have this experience this close and understanding further helps me to help others by expressing this, to be a little bit more awakened and open And for example, I would hear men talking about going to these places, and I would say, did you know those women are human trafficked? They're not there by their own volition. And the men would, say, no, that's not true. They're prostitutes. And here's this newspaper article about how this ring was broken up here across town. And the truth is, my CIA friend had brought that article to me and showed me how, even though those women were, so-called busted, they all were human trafficked. What takes place is these cases are assigned a specific newspaper writer. They are assigned a specific court system of attorneys and judges. And every one of those people are fully aware that they are supposedly persecuting prostitutes, but this is part of an organization that is operating here. And I said to my friend, who in his type of rescues that he would do, he would go in and rescue these women from these spaces all the way, to Houston, Texas, and back here. They are generally run through Texas and Chicago here, and one other location I don't remember right now. And this is able to be run this way because there are so many officials who are on the take already for this. And I would love to say that that's just unbelievable. That could not be happening. But the truth is, it is happening. And he named towns in the area here where, for the sake of the girls' safety, that police officers were guarding the situation and making sure that the girls were safe, because the girls are so often exposed to violence. So he would talk about these poor women who, when they were rescued then, because it was so dangerous for them to go back to South Korea, because if they went back to South Korea, the chances of them getting picked up again or and put right back into the system because they had escaped, or for their family to be punished in some way because their families always threatened this, or they would lose faith in their family and they couldn't go back. So these women, even after they are rescued, are facing dire circumstances. And in one instant, he had talked about one of the men who is responsible for getting rid of the women who are long past their usefulness. So the women, once they are in their 40s, they are collected by this man on a bus, and he is paid an enormous amount of money in order to dispose of these women. So my friend had gotten in close to this man and paid him more money, walked onto a bus and met at a location, walked onto this bus of 30 to 40 women who were on their way to simply being disposed of. Now, the point here is that this is taking place in our society all around us. He expressed to me that Niles is a very big space for this, and I have even had someone who had been up in the Niles area come to a massage for me once before and ask me what I thought about happy endings, which I proceeded to tell him exactly how he could get up off my table and leave now. And he said, because when I went here and got it, they give happy endings there, and he was in Niles. And it is inundated there in that population, that these women are in hotels. They are in small places that say it's massage. There are usually just 3 of them. And unfortunately, so much paperwork would always have to be done. He was always frustrated. And I said to him one time, why doesn't the law more just go in here? Why can't you just go in here and stop this and stop the whole operation and arrest the people? Because he would have to literally do a tactical rescue and escape from them. He's not coming in with guns and arresting the people who are operating this. He was just rescuing the girls. And he said, because it's just not the way it's done. But what he meant by that was connected to a comment that he had made at one time when he talked with me. And he said, from what I've seen, and this man was first of all working in Russia and had literally met Putin and was taken through the Kremlin, showed the trap doors where they dropped the bodies through, et cetera, and he said, the world is not ready to know what I have seen. And that is very sad. And unfortunately, I believe even maybe he might have been exposed to them initiating this in him, but my friend ended up getting a very fast advancing cancer, and he died very quickly. But these are the firsthand truths that are taking place in our society. How do we handle that we would like to be having a happy existence here, and we would like to still be getting on with our lives, enjoying our lives? But for someone like me, I have a difficult time just doing it for me, knowing that within a short distance from where I live, and even in spaces that have even been close to me, children, women are being harmed, men are being harmed, and they are crying out for us to see what's taking place. Crying out. When I was a student teacher studying for my degree and completing the degree in physical education and doing my student teaching, there was a young girl in the school that was somewhat segregated from the other students. And I was informed that she was being neglected at home, was the word. And she looked into my eyes, and I will never forget that look of calling out and asking me to help her. It resonated so deeply with a space that is already part of me, that we need society to help. We need their awakenedness. We need them to come out of the sleep. We need them to understand, see these levels of energy that are taking place here in order for this to be dismantled. And I continue the work I do in this space in order to help specifically and especially with these types of situations. So a lot of what's coming up is this space that's been behind the scenes. This is the elephant in the room that is real. What do we do? And again, the first thing we need to do is to acknowledge it as truth. It is there. How do we learn to recognize that there are very, very many what appear to be humans in human vehicles that are not truly functioning as a human would, with the empathy and compassion that we know and have, that would not allow us to perpetrate these crimes and these evils. So I am going to take a commercial break. I'm going to come back. I'm going to begin to talk about some of the people that I have lined up, where we are going to be addressing systematically how did this begin in our society? Where does it start from? We're going to go all the way back to the demiurge space and look at a space of a spiritual level that is not connected to source. We're going to look at the false matrix overlay and go into looking at the hyperdimensional interferences, the thought forms that are interfering, and how we can reconnect again. So I will take just about 2.5 minutes here, and I will be right back.
Feminine Frequency Radio Network hosts shows 7 days a week. Call in to listen live 929-477-1183 and dial 1 to connect to the studio to ask a question, or listen online via blogtalkradio.com/Feminine Frequency Radio Network. Organic Frequency Radio Show is 1.5 hour live chat with Stephanie and Oksana and their lovely guests about the nature of existence and holistic way of living here and now, and perhaps even after. Join us every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time. Call-in number to listen live is 929-477-1183, and to ask a question, press 1 to connect to the studio. Our guests share their stories and walking path of their healing, along with services that they have developed and packaged for the rest of the world to experience and benefit from. We're here to hold a space for an exchange of experiences for the purpose of evolvement and expansion of consciousness.
Hello and welcome. You are now entering the corridors of Twilight Epiphanies Talk Radio with your host, Cindy Magnuson, premiering Thursday evenings, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on Feminine Frequency Radio Network. You are invited on a talk radio journey to the center of self. Join us as Cindy guides you, the listeners, in sensory and perception upgrades where revelations and golden epiphanies pierce the veils of illusion. Don't miss this opportunity for your next dose of Twilight Epiphanies. Okay, and welcome back, everyone. So we're continuing on talking about addressing the recent scandals that are all coming to the surface in the way of Pedogate, Pizzagate, for those individuals who may not have looked into or have this crossed your path, but some of the other spaces that have taken place are the scandals with Jerry Epstein, the billionaire who was involved with taking people like Bill Clinton to private islands, and sexual relationships happening with children as young as 14, the Magdalene laundries in Ireland, the Franklin cover-up scandal, the Vatican scandals, of course, Jerry Jimmy Savile, actually, the BBC star who David Icke had been attempting to expose for 20 years. He was a BBC star who was very close to the Queen and King of England, and basically was a high-level pedophile and had the freedom to do as he pleased because he was a BBC star. And again, the difficulty with these spaces, how can, if one man says, like David Icke exposes this, but it takes 20 years for humanity to catch on and believe it. And that's a really long time and a very long list of continued abuses that if more people open their eyes and see it, then it can't be hidden anymore. What is difficult, as I mentioned earlier, is that people find it really hard if they have not had a personal experience with these types of, you could sometimes call them soulless, they don't have the same type of, true human values inside. And they literally take on an external persona that is believed. And, I had spoken to someone who is going to come on, and her situation exactly went as that. When her perpetrator went to court, the perpetrator had such a strong personality in the community that the perpetrator, in effect, got away with 14 years of crimes, ritual sexual abuse, incest, because of no one being able to believe that this person in society, and a lot of times it is a minister like this, or it is, in my case, like a chief of police in Minnesota who is a detective, and the detective that's turning in the bad guys. So they become very adapted to portraying themselves, spotless and clean in society, while having these characters behind the scenes. And also in my own experiences with having this type of a predator imprint into a sexual chakra, I also went on to have experiences with sociopaths. And one of the most significant spaces that I ever, made it through was sustaining this space long enough to see the actual farce taking place, to see what was going on behind the scenes versus what was being sold to the public. And this space is something that you have to be able to energetically tune into. And again, that's what I mean by it's easy for us to be fooled unless we have an identification of the energy that we're reading in there that says something's not quite right. Why is my intuition trying to inform me of something? I remember several years ago already, I liked to watch documentaries on Netflix, and there was a documentary called there was one called the boy dancers in Pakistan, and then there was, I'm not sure if it was coupled in the same one, but I think it was the same one. It was called The Dancers, the Pakistani boys, the dancers. And the military there, and I'm not attacking any one race or anything, this just happened to be what it was about. I believe this takes place in many military situations, but the generals and upper levels there all would take a small boy from a young boy from the neighboring community where the parents were poor, and they would say that they were going to become dancers for these men. And basically what it was they were actually becoming, their sex slave, their pedophilia in there. And in this particular case, the person who was doing the documentary actually rescued the boy. However, the boy, as he took the boy in and he was doing a documentary about him becoming a dancer, he realized through doing the documentary that this wasn't about dancing. Even though dancing circles did take place, it was a sexual space. And these boys were being molested. And that boy did get molested. And the change that you see in that poor child from going in and supposedly having this prestigious place then to coming out was absolutely heartbreaking. So in these spaces that are so delicate in observing and difficult for us to look at, again, it is our space to heal it because we are here right now. And of course, there are those of us who are working in these spaces because we came back here to work in these spaces. And there are other people in the world. You all have your own work you're doing, your own level of how much time you have. So this is to say that we all can be doing our own specific work, but as a collective, we have no choice but to integrate what we have coming to the surface as what we can refer to as our collective shadow. Because even in looking at an experience of having our current president, he represents the collective shadow in the space he is. He represents our side as a collective that has moved away from true spirit. And what we have taking place in our political arena is a space of scripted plays. Mostly everything that it comes to us in news, those of you who have studied and understand the importance of this, is that the mainstream media is all owned and controlled by a small group of people. And they can dictate down the lines what is acceptable to be spoken and what is not. True investigative journalism is a little more difficult. I have a client that I have been massaging for several years, and I won't expose too much information personally, but this particular client is very big in the judicial system, overseeing several judicial systems, I will say. And she is an innocent. And there have been scandals in her arena. And I have been informing her of these situations for many years in conversation when I can slip things in and bring some higher seated awarenesses. And now she's turning and asking more. And when I said, and even our Child Protective Services is not a space that is completely safe, that the operations have filtered into so many spaces that corruption is running itself. And because of the fact that the people who have gotten themselves involved, however, have been filmed or have accepted monetary rewards to keep quiet. And the last thing they will do is break those codes of silence, because it would devastate their lives. So this underbelly of corruption in the way of especially pedophilia and human trafficking is what is keeping these forces together in the background here, in the underbelly, the foundation. So once this is continuing to be dismantled, and how we are handling this is what will bring healing and continue to us into a space where this will not be able to take place, because when our intuition is so high, so developed, perceptually aware, and we move back into an original blueprint that we came from, these perpetrators won't be able to do this. And that is the goal here. Now, again, let's step up outside to another level. What is taking place has a karmic base to it. And I'm not going to say that any child or woman who is human trafficked is experiencing negative karma. That's not what I mean. Because the idea of karma has been suggested to us in guilt spaces, and also perpetrations are happening first cause, and perpetrations are happening for other reasons of people believing they should take these punishments on. Okay? As scapegoats. So there is a varied degrees and varied different means of how these crimes have continued, and people have coupled their experiences to them. So I'm even going to bring back Daniela, the medical intuitive, and we are going to have a higher level understanding of how to integrate this space of trauma as a soul experience through forgiveness, through releasing self-punishing, self-sabotaging karmic expectations, and moving even to where we can even introduce a state of grace to forgive self, a state of self-sacrifice, not necessarily needing to experience what we may have perpetrated. And, here is the space that is of all these very difficult angles to look at, because in very many cases, a child experiencing violent rape and molesting in a snuff film and being murdered is going to be creating also a non-ending vicious cycle of continuous back and forth, non-ending cycle if we don't break these cycles. So there are higher spiritual ways to observe what's taking place here in order to not continue the vicious cycle of karma, which some of this has been suggested in the way of guilt. I have worked with several clients who are literally experiencing continued traumas in their lives as a result of feeling that God is punishing them, and they believe they should be punished for something they did. And there is, at a point, when I brought them into greater understanding and said, you are experiencing helping you in any way? And the answer to that was always no, absolutely not. It was creating worse situations. It was creating other negative experiences that were spiraling out in multiple directions. So there has to be these analytical spaces of understanding that these events have come to be occurring through diverse situations without looking at them as being from one means, one direction. So then if we take a look at the human condition, and it is, for those who have looked into it deeper, believe that the human physical body has been interfered with. Our original blueprint, which still exists, just like a phantom limbs energetic imprint would, the original imprint is still there, but we have been tuned out of, disconnected from that true source space, and we've been diverted into more of a false matrix, that we call it space, where a construct which is more artificially created, artificial consciousness, meaning that it is more like a quantum computer operating system that is informing us in a different mode and has access to what and is part of these hyperdimensional influences. And I'm very happy to say that Bernard Gunther is coming on, and he is going to talk to us about hyperdimensional influences and how there are these vehicles here that we perceive as human, and we couldn't possibly believe they could be committing these crimes, which is the difficult part for us to put our foot down and say that this has to stop. You're simply not going to continue. I don't give you permission to I do not allow this. And he's going to communicate more to us about these interdimensional, these hyperdimensional influences, what they are, where they came from, what are the different phrases, names, labels that have been given to these. And the purpose of this is to help us unite our understanding that there are many influences coming into our human vehicle, especially more so now that a complex of electromagnetic frequencies coming from energy fields that aren't in favor of our human vehicles, with all of the Wi-Fi that's going on, but they can carry on those pathways coming from this, coming from our phone, coming from our computer. They can piggyback onto that information, onto that line of communication coming to us, thought forms into our consciousness. So we are much more easily triggered by hyperdimensional influences. And I'm also going to talking with someone about coming on and talking about how even again, as Ivo began our talks, to cleanse our physical bodies from being in an acidic state to an alkaline state, and to remove heavy metals from our system, makes it more difficult for these frequencies of communication to come through and affect our thinking. And that's what raising our vibration is. So the more that we have heavy metals in us, literally, we are going to be more able to be remote controlled by quantum computers. So physically now in our world, that has been set up. But the truth is, that is not more powerful than your true spiritual essence is. Absolutely not. Absolutely 100%. Our human vehicles, fully energized with spirit, bringing more connection back to source systematically through our deeper understanding of ourselves, to tuning back in to the sun gazing, getting more exposure to the sun, getting out more closer to nature, retuning back into those spaces, cleaning our vehicle, cleaning our filters out, which are our organs, having our body become more alkaline, eliminating the parasites that are within us, is eliminating also the effects of, at least working at it more, the effects of the psychic virus, which is what this is. So this is the genetic changes that have happened to the physical vehicle where it got downgraded a bit. The stories of us being greater, grander, giants, if we may, in other spaces are true. And we have been downscaled. So our space here that we can work on is this holistic approach. I have a friend, Lewis, and I'm in negotiations with Lewis coming on to talk to us about the very intricate information that he has on the level of spirit and understanding that space. I find that the collective in general has difficulty with, and myself included, because everyone's using these terms different, between energy, entity, thought forms, archon, psychic virus, spirit, soul, etc. These terms are sometimes very easily confused, and I'm going to work in these next 8 weeks at coming to a little bit more of a unified space of agreement as to what's actually taking place inside. And we don't have to have it all specifically conclusive, but when we have so many scattered terminologies, that's where our energy as a collective isn't focused, and our intent for what we want to see changed by using our deep discernment and our neutral space of how we're going to address this is somewhat diluted, because we are not energetically focused more like a laser beam, because a lot of terminology has us confused about where to feel this heightened space of creation. So I'm going to take here again just a brief commercial break, and I will come back and I am going to close off a little bit and just continue to talk a little more about the upcoming shows. Okay, I'll be right back.
Feminine Frequency Radio Network hosts shows 7 days a week. Call in to listen live 929-477-1183 and dial 1 to connect to the studio to ask a question, or listen online via blogtalkradio.com/Feminine Frequency Radio Network. Organic Frequency Radio Show is 1.5 hour live chat with Stephanie and Oksana and their lovely guests about the nature of existence and holistic way of living here and now, and perhaps even after. Join us every Monday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific Time. Call-in number to listen live is 929-477-1183, and to ask a question, press 1 to connect to the studio. Our guests share their stories and walking path of their healing, along with services that they have developed and packaged for the rest of the world to experience and benefit from. We're here to hold a space for an exchange of experiences for the purpose of evolvement and expansion of consciousness.
Hello and welcome. You are now entering the corridors of Twilight Epiphanies Talk Radio with your host, Cindy Magnuson, premiering Thursday evenings, 7 to 8:30 p.m. Central Standard Time on Feminine Frequency Radio Network. You are invited on a talk radio journey to the center of self. Join us as Cindy guides you, the listeners, in sensory and perception upgrades where revelations and golden epiphanies pierce the veils of illusion. Don't miss this opportunity for your next dose of Twilight Epiphanies. Okay, and welcome back again. And I would like to continue just giving a little bit more of information about who will be coming on and speaking over the next 8 weeks here. My friend Rachel was rescued at age 14 from her experiences in sexual abuse in her home. And she's going to be talking about the perspective from the child's point of view and the experience of being rescued, moving through healing, and then going on to working in the counseling field of working with both prostitutes and perpetrators of sexual crimes. And another woman who was escaped from the pedophile rings, the very elite high-level pedophile rings. I am in correspondence with her to determine when she would be able to come on. We're going to have an astrologer on to look at the signs in the sky that are indicative of this time frame of deep internal cleansing. And a couple other people that I am also going to be contacting. Possibly, I have received back from a woman who, I won't say her name in case she isn't able to make it on, but she is an internationally known shaman and has expressed interest, has just written another book. And if she is able to possibly do a pre-recorded show with me, she will also be talking about the space of integration of shamanism into our Western healing methods. I also have a friend and client here who is a woman who has a counseling profession, and she is utilizing Qigong in her work. So I'm going to be giving us perspectives of how to work with this collective and individual trauma in alternative healing ways. And I am very happy also to see that traditional mainstream medicine in the way of psychology and counseling so very often is introducing these alternative methods. I also have a second both client and friend who is a clinical behavioral psychologist, and she has also agreed in the future to come on, and she works in with somatic healing. So my goal also in working through this space is to look at how we can address the situation, not coming from a place of our rage, coming from a place of discernment, motherly and fatherly correction, constructive criticism, and absolute firm standing that this will be addressed now, and those individuals have a choice of healing and taking the responsibility on their own for what they have expressed in imbalance, or they will face the consequences of being moved into that. And that is a bottom line. Now, we can be firm in our directive, and that does not mean that we can control whatever's going to happen, because there are spaces that, again, step out again and look a little higher again. There, unfortunately, will need to be horrendous spaces taking place until enough people wake up and it no longer can be or needs to be continued. For example, already, 15 years ago, I was expressing a move away from vaccinating my children, and I wouldn't continue with my son once I understood. And I very fortunately have 3 grandchildren who are not vaccinated, and they are healthy as can be. And yet, addressing this with people to have them understand the very non-logical fact that our physical vehicles are not defective in the way that vaccine proponents are making us believe. And if we cannot break away from the fear indoctrination, then unfortunately still many parents are going to experience, a Russian roulette with whether or not their child has, 1, an extra sensitivity, or 2, simply cannot tolerate the amount of foreign substances that do not belong in the human vehicle. And that, of course, will come across to many still as being a personal opinion. And I very comfortably will state that it is fact, because I can observe the facts of all the parents who stated clearly how their children were doing up until a certain vaccine series was given and what took place afterwards. Now, there is a also greater component to what is taking place. And of course, we understand that very many levels of what we ingest and food has been interfered with, our water, the air. So there is an onslaught of toxins that are in the human vehicle that do not belong in there. And when you do that to the human vehicle, you can overload it, just like never changing your oil in your car or changing your filters in the car, getting it tuned up. If you don't do that, the car is going to suffer. And that's what's taking place with us here. So how do we as a collective not hate the perpetrators? How do we not project further negativity into a field that is, in a sense, wanting us to be outraged and angry because these hyperdimensional energies feed off of that? So, a difficult place to come from a higher level of spirituality before we are placing words on the internet, before we are placing words into the collective. So, for example, you first see something happen, I first see something happen, I first experience something that's shocking or atrocity to me, I'm going to lose my cool for a little bit. But then the best response, of course, is to wait before you address the space and allow yourself to come to a neutral, centered, balanced space before you let out your energies into the collective towards the resolution of what needs to be done. And for example, when we get pulled into the political space taking place, I am aware that people who feel in their consciousness connected to trying to correct these spaces, they are more immersed in them. So they follow this plays that are taking place a little bit more attentively. And I understand they have to do that. And it can appear that someone like myself in a different space, because I don't speak very often about those places, isn't addressing that on an energetic level. But in truth, I'm addressing it from a far greater, more powerful, energetic space to resolve it than the ways that we are convinced may change something. Because if we observe what's been taking place across the board, we haven't made a great deal of dents in changing the arena, because the energies have already moved into a lot of power places. And our important spaces that we can do is take our energy out of fueling where they want us to fuel, because your energy collapses. Your thoughts send energy. Your thoughts are energy. Your attention, your focus. When you are fueled in something, you can be giving your energy to something they want you to be involved in, and it's distracting you, it's draining you, and it's not the best use of your energy. So there is caution in how we are addressing facts as we see it. So we can come from a more neutral fact space and say, okay, I have facts about this, type of system not working. I have facts about this system. I believe this system is working better. Now, if you just leave those facts out there without the strong emotional play of energies happening in it, you are better off that way. And that is very abstract, but it's a space of, for example, when we are at an extreme emotional place, we naturally invite the opposite emotion in, meaning in the opposite creation in. It's sort of like looking at how the Salem witch hunts happened around with the Puritans. You had the extreme good, and I'm not going to say that the witches were perpetrators, but you had religious perpetrators happening in those cases, falsely accusing, and you obviously also did have sorcery spaces that were probably taking place. But the point is that once you have a puritanical space created in this superstructured limited box, you invite the other extreme because there has to be balance. So a lot of what we need to come to is to move more towards center and not be in these levels of extremes, and we will not have to face the extreme levels of what has taken place, because a lot of the shadow side has been created out of extremes. And so we will be exploring potentially how this, perversion space is moved in. It is absolutely true that there is a space of sexualizing our children taking place. Anyone who looks into this, what the Disney movies are doing, what advertising is doing, what some children's toys are like, what children's books are like. I went to my daughter's house. My granddaughter had a book. She was 9 years old on the counter. The name of it was Flirty. Ping, something went off right away with me. Why is a 9-year-old reading a book or has access to a book in a grade school that the name of it is Flirty? I only needed to open to 1 or 2 pages, and inside there, the words such as that it was teaching someone how to nail a date with her, and another part of the conversation was talking about eating a banana as a metaphor for learning something within there. Eating a banana, and this is verbatim. And at that time, my daughter, because my daughter has a mom who follows all these things, and sometimes my daughter's like, not again, and she sort of like rolled her eyes a little bit. And then a month later, my granddaughter was talking to me and said, "Oh, Nana, I want you to know, my mom said, yeah, that book was not appropriate." And you know what, Nana? I didn't feel good when I was reading it, because that book was written by a pedophile, and that's not the only book that's been written in this manner, and our children are reading. And again, why did I perceive that right away? Because I'm tuned in to picking those things up. And it will be, and you will be happier in life and see more and be able to protect more and work towards more healing taking place when your abilities are heightened to this level, because it isn't special to who I am or anyone else. And I'm sure that many of you are already picking this up in very many different ways. And the only way to learn it is through hindsight. And I talked about, hindsight and intuition in my number 12 episode that was right before this. So on a closing note, as we are leaving here in what is episode number 13, and I will be beginning these shows next week. I will announce during the week those shows that are already lined up and the dates, and then I'll probably be able to do 3 or 4 shows and then announce the other 4 shows after that. I'm hoping to do at least 2 months on this and continue to explore, how a theme like this, how we can collectively work on healing all together. And so I think that about brings us to the end here. I didn't have anything else that I think I needed to mention. If anyone out there believes that they know someone who would be a great addition to this lineup coming up as a guest on the show, or they have worked with a healer who has specifically worked with these areas, have them contact me at thectechnique@gmail.com or in a private message to me on Facebook. And, I'll look at getting them on the show. So thank you, everyone, for joining me. I did think that this might be a little bit shorter show tonight, but as it goes, I remember when I was introducing that I was going to be taking on doing Twilight Epiphanies, and I said I really like to talk. And what I meant by that is that I really enjoy helping others. I really enjoy teaching. I have put my heart and soul into countless thousands now of hours of working towards delivering a message that is more balanced and as close to truth as possible, because there is so much to sift through, and working towards integrating the higher level concepts into these even beginner type spaces and making some difficult areas a little bit more digestible in the way of, by bringing greater understanding to concepts, breaking the barrier between people thinking that, they could never do that or be like that or have that skill or have that ability or know that. And that is just simply not true. Everyone has capabilities. And even the space where there are, if we even went as calling them soulless, vehicles here that are just inhabited by, some hyperdimensional energies that are just operating on a program. And that's true. That's coming to the surface. That is true. That those programs can still be healed. Creation is just simply so expansive that difficult to ascertain even how much has been created here, and the different spiritual beings and influences that are part of the human experience in totality is massive. So, with that thought, thank you all for joining me tonight. I wish you another week of love, happiness, health, wealth, and abundance, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye now.